Good evening, and welcome to another episode of Historical News. Thanks for tuning in, and please welcome our dear guest, Danish history expert William Hack. Always a pleasure to have you on board, William. Today we're going to take a look at the conflict in... William, you do realize that today's topic is Ukraine, don't you?
Well, of course, Alex. But let's get something straight to begin with. Since the dawn of time, humans have been engaged in warfare one way or the other. And the human suffering has only increased in time as weapons used has gotten more and more advanced. The war in Ukraine, of course, is no exception. The human toll is heartbreaking as it is with every other conflict. It doesn't matter if the conflict is in Ukraine or Iraq or Afghanistan, Palestine, Syria, that doesn't matter. The human suffering is heartbreaking. But if you take a step back and approach the conflict in a more sinister and analytic way, the crisis in Ukraine seems shrouded in hypocrisy. And whenever talk falls on hypocrisy, the US always comes to the fore.
Please elaborate.
Well, the whole conflict took off once Ukraine started seriously to look towards the West for new alliances. This would ultimately have led to deployment of Western military equipment in a historical-speaking Russian comfort zone. I mean, how would the US react if Mexico and China suddenly became buddies and China planned to deploy missiles on the US-Mexican border, strategically pointing towards the US? The US would surely react. Hypocrisy. Putin cannot do what the US would do were they in his shoes. And you can trace this back all the way to 1823 and the Monroe Doctrine, a doctrine that stipulates that no foreign power may get a foothold in the Americas. As you might remember, Alex, Third World War nearly broke out back in the 60s when Russia wanted to deploy missiles on Cuban soil. I mean, we point our greasy fingers at Putin, portraying him as the war criminal he is. No doubt about it. But to do this while our own war criminals are parading freely around? Come on, Alex, it simply makes me sick.
Do you have anyone specific in mind?
Well, Alex, we can always summon the Royal Crooked Flush.
The Royal Crooked what?
The Royal Crooked Flush. Let me introduce. Let's begin with Madeleine Albright, who, as the US ambassador to the UN back in 1993, was leading the drive to enforce sanctions on Iraq. A famous interview from back in 96, just before a report was to come out on the subject, is quite revealing. Let's hear what 60 Minutes had to ask the future US Secretary of State.
We have heard that 500,000 children have died. I mean, that's more children than died in Hiroshima. And is the price worth it?
I think this is a very hard choice, but we think the price is worth it.
These sanctions were put in place because the US maintained that Saddam Hussein had stockpiled weapons of mass destruction. A claim we know today to be debunked. Nevertheless, the US kept pushing this claim, and in a speech in Cincinnati back in October 2002, President George W. Bush reiterated the notion. Namely, that Saddam Hussein had a massive stockpile of these weapons. And my own Danish Prime Minister, Anders Fogh Rasmussen, told the Danish Parliament and public that he himself had seen the evidence for these stockpiles, which in the end was the turning point for Denmark's engagement in the war in Iraq. A few years later, he was rewarded with a job as Secretary General of NATO. In England, back in 2011, the Chilcot Report offered devastating critique of Tony Blair and his handling of the situation leading up to the war, stating that the Prime Minister had grossly exaggerated the dangers of Saddam Hussein and the threat he posed. Which, in hindsight, isn't that strange, now that we know that there were no weapons of mass destruction. It was all a lie. And anywhere between 250,000 to 1.2 million Iraqis died as a consequence of this blatant lie. The Washington Post estimated the number being somewhere between 500 and 600,000 back in 2018. And despite this terrifying high number of casualties, it carried no consequences whatsoever for the lying culprits who paved the way for this bloodbath. I mean, Madeleine Albright just went to her grave recently, praised in the Danish press with words like glorious, a true American success story and fascinating role model. The remaining three are still being summoned by the media. You know, whenever political dilemmas need to be dealt with by so-called experts. This, whilst we know all too well that they're lying through their teeth all covered in blood from innocent men, women and especially children. Like Desmond Tutu and other well-renowned human rights advocates, I truly find these guys worthy of standing trial at the War Tribunal in The Hague for crimes against humanity. But this, of course, will never happen. And you know why?
No.
Because they're on the right side of history. They do the bidding of evil in a completely twisted version of reality. That is, the reality being presented to us by Washington, D.C. and whoever pulls the strings over there. From Capitol Hill to Hollywood and, you know, news agencies at large.
Okay, I see. So now we're the bad guys as well.
Well, it is most definitely the media that tells people who to root for and who to condemn.
I think you need to specify your...
Well, picture the scene, Alex. An imam is giving a sermon in a small room, somewhere on the outskirts of Copenhagen, you know, to his small congregation, saying something like, I don't know, let's say, Islam and freedom of speech being incompatible. There would easily be an uproar. Politicians and journalists alike would trample over one another, head over heels, to condemn these religious holy men with their mindset in the Middle Ages, posing a threat to society and global security. On the other hand, ultra-Orthodox Jews can rent one of the biggest stadiums in New York City and throw a conference about the dangers of the internet. Try and listen to what one of their leading rabbis had to say on this matter.
Shalom, we've already lost the 20 to 35-year-olds, and I don't believe it's so. But we don't have to lose the 0 to 20s. We can put a stop to it now. I've seen with my own eyes people giving children of 11 years old Blackberries and iPhones and iPods. Are they out of their minds? What do they think?
True, the event took place back in 2012. But the very same ultra-Orthodox rabbis still cling to the same beliefs. And no one seems to find these radical views interesting. Least of all in the press of the so-called free world. And it's not as if I'm saying, you know, that the media world is controlled by a bunch of brainwashed ultra-Orthodox Jews. This is not what I'm saying. Neither am I saying, you know, that they're keeping a keen eye on our every move and that they will find whatever they're looking for if they try hard enough. This is not what I'm saying. What I am saying, however, is that the discrepancy in the way these two holy men are being handled by the media, well, it just can't be the result of random decision-making. Because rabbis can get away with having and expressing the most radical views whilst being met with deafening silence in the press. At the other end of the spectrum, the Muslim imam can hardly fart without risking some chemical weapons unit examining his rear end. It's been like this for as far back as I can remember. It makes no sense. It just makes no sense unless some kind of well-coordinated media strategy lies behind. Especially as the fanatical imam holds no political power of any significance, whereas the ultra-Orthodox Jews carry immense influence in the state of Israel, the Middle East, and beyond. It is madness, to say the least. Mainstream media is presenting the world in a detached and unrecognizable black and white image. And this holds true for Israel as it does for Iraq, Afghanistan, or Ukraine. The shades are just all gone. And not only the shades, man. Nowadays, it's more or less all pitch black.
Oh no. Now it finally happened.
What do you mean?
The Russians have blocked our network. It had to happen. Freedom of speech is under attack.
Ah, come on. Don't play the freedom of speech card again.
What do you mean?
Well, if you insist, let's shine some more light on this hypocrisy thing. I mean, here in the West, we were the ones who first blocked some Russian news outlets, under the pretext that they were spreading fake news. However, when the Russians did the very same thing, it all flipped 180 degrees. And now, all of a sudden, their actions were a head-on assault on freedom of speech. You do see the hypocrisy, don't you? When it's us, it's righteous. When it's them, it's evil. And that holds true for more or less every narrative I can think of as far back as anyone can remember. We, the Western white Aryan race, with our Greek rational background, whatever we come up with is a gift to humanity. And anyone telling another version of reality, faking it. And can't stand it no more, Alex. Just can't stand it.
Well, but don't tell me the Russians aren't manipulating facts to their own advantage. Don't tell me you're that naive.
Well, of course they are. But so do we. Our very own media is also altering facts and spreading propaganda to support the political landscape they're part of. To keep up public opinion.
That is harsh criticism. I hope you have some strong evidence to back it up, William.
Right you are. And I wouldn't put forth such claims if I had not my back covered. Let me give you a totally relevant example regarding the conflict in Ukraine. You see, our national public service station, the Danish Broadcasting Corporation, abbreviated DR, ran an article on their website which stayed there for weeks on end, giving us all the reasons why we should support Ukraine and why the Russians' claim to the territory were dubious, to say the least. Under the heading, Understand Ukraine's Bloody Past, History is being used as a weapon, DR is presenting the Danish public with an article, a state-of-the-art article, with animated graphics and everything. Fancy looking indeed. And unless the reader knows any better, he would find himself safe and secure, especially with all the footnotes in the end. Clearly, the author has done his homework. But if you look at the article a little closer, a more sinister reality arises. Let me dwell for a moment at two important sentences in the article. And it might be a bit technical now, but bear with me for a second. 'Cause if you scroll down a bit until we reach the Kazakh Hetmanate, then this Hetmanate is being described as a kind of state that emerged around the middle of the 17th century. So far, so good. But then the magic of a wordsmith begins to take shape. 'Cause in the very next sentence, the word kind of has disappeared and the Kazakh Hetmanate is now being transformed into an actual sovereign state. A sovereign state that lasted for 150 years. I was baffled, to say the least. 150 years? With my historical knowledge, this made absolutely no sense. And I wasn't the only one, apparently, because within the next 2 weeks, DR shortened the period to 100 years. Oops, perhaps we smeared it on too thick. But even this figure is grossly exaggerated. A simple search on Wikipedia will reveal that the state did emerge as a vassal state. That is, a kind of state back in 1654. Only to be divided between Poland and Russia in 1667, without the Kazakhs even being present at the negotiations. That is, a kind of state that lasted for 13 years. A far cry from the 100 to 150 years as DR tried to make it out to be. That history is being used as a weapon is old news. And what it tells us more than anything is that we too here in the West uses history as a tool, as long as it serves our interest. Hypocrisy once again in the most trusted news outlet in Denmark, a country where critical journalism is thought to be a core value. And yet, once again, we are being deceived.
Perhaps we're not flawless, but at least we can criticize the actions of our Western democracies without fearing for our lives. I mean, we are still talking about the free world.
Right. Which is why Julian Assange is rotting up in a British jail.
What?
Yeah, Julian Assange, the founder of WikiLeaks. He's rotting up in a jail because he revealed to the public how the American military violated international laws over and over again.
Yeah, okay. Perhaps you got another point there. But the Russians' propaganda is still worse than ours. Isn't that a fact?
Well, where I come from, a liar is a liar. There is no such as an honorable one. And the question I'm stuck with is, why is it necessary to lie? And the simple answer to that question is that you only lie when the truth doesn't help your cause sufficiently. Why is it not enough to take a pro-Ukrainian stance, arguing that they've been under the Russian yoke for so long, that is, the evil Russian yoke for so long, that they will do anything to remain independent? That would be the simple truth. A truth, of course, that would or could be used by many other territories in the world, who would love more independence for themselves. Not a good path to go down if you ask the policymakers in Washington, D.C. Then it's much better to create a false image of Ukraine being a country with long historical roots.
And you're certain that Ukraine is not such a country?
I'm positive. Listen, can you remember any bigger European military campaign in which a Ukrainian army turned out victorious?
No.
Right, because there were no such battle. Take a country like Denmark, with our strong cultural heritage and our far-reaching history.
Yeah, let's do that. When did Denmark ever win a big military campaign in Europe?
What?
Yeah. When did Denmark ever win a big military campaign in Europe?
Yeah, okay. Bad example. But still,
No. Let's dwell on your military misery.
Well, it truly is kind of embarrassing. But okay. Back in the good old Viking days, in the 11th century, Denmark controlled most of England. But yeah, let's fast forward, let's scroll forward fast. And then, 1346, we lost our Baltic possessions. In 1520, most of Sweden broke loose from our dominion. Then 1658, we lost the rest of Sweden. And as we sided with Napoleon till the bitter end and beyond, we lost Norway to Sweden in 1814. In 1864, we lost large swaths of lands to Germany. Hamburg used to be our second largest city. And then, World War II, Germany invaded us in less than a day, and we lost Iceland.
So nothing left, huh?
We did get to keep Greenland.
Oh, that's just so cold.
I know, right?
But how about your civil wars, then?
Lost them.
All of them?
Every single one.
Ouch. Yeah. How about the war on drugs?
We'll push you straight in the center of Copenhagen. Duh! I mean, if we ever lost a battle, that will be the one.
Okay, then I guess we have to go back to the Vikings and the Battle of Hastings in 1066. You nailed that one big time, right?
Not at all, Alex. I mean, the Normans turned out victorious. We didn't even manage to lose that one.
What?
Yeah. Well, the loser, Harold Godwinson, was only the cousin to the Danish king. So it would take some creative fact manipulation and propaganda to label Denmark as the losers.
Well, there you have it then.
What?
Yeah. Let me pull some strings at your Danish Broadcasting Network, DR, and have them alter the historical facts of 1066. It's very hip, Turn Denmark into the glorious nation that she could have been.
What? No.
Come on. Grow up. Swallow your pride. Sell your soul.
To the lowest bidder? Hell no. Never. Ever.